You're listening to the Hey Sis podcast. This is a space for millennial women to breathe and then go out into the world and lead. Now, here's your host, Dr. Dee Evans.
Hey, everybody. Thank you all for listening to the Hey Sis podcast. I am your host, Dr. Dee Evans. In today's episode, we will be discussing this phenomenon that I would like to name people pleasing. It is a trauma response, and I'm sure most of us have heard of fight or flight, and even the freeze response. I really started reading about that probably about 5 years ago. But I don't know if it's just me, but I just recently found out about fawn, which is pretty much people pleasing on crack. And today in this episode, I want to break down the 4 different conflict responses, aka I call them phenomenons, but I really want to focus on fawn. And I will touch on briefly fight, flight, and freeze. But if you've been a member of the Hey Sis community, and trust me, it's not a big deal. If you've listened to one podcast, you are a part of the community, period. But if you've been listening to these episodes, especially this year in season 2, we have not shied away from talking about what we need to do to heal an unhealed trauma. And as I've mentioned before in previous podcasts, trauma is sometimes extremely difficult to pinpoint because you might not realize that how you're responding or how you're behaving is a response to some trauma that you have not even discovered that you've endured. And again, remember, what is traumatic to you may not be traumatic to another person. In other words, what is traumatic to one person might not be traumatic to the other. So how your mom acted towards you as a parent may be traumatic to you in your point of view and your perspective, but it may not be traumatic in the eyes of your younger brother or your older sister. It might not have affected them the same way or had a negative impact on them the same way it had a negative impact on you, which can be isolating. But if you want to heal without having the regret and the bitterness, it's important as a response to the trauma, as a response to the hurt, to ensure that you allow people who saw you hurt, or individuals that were around you when you were in the most painful seasons of your life, you have to allow them to have their own perspective on what they saw. Even though it's different from yours, it's integral to your healing. You cannot make people have your experience, but what you can do is respect that their perspective on what happened to you is different than your reality. Now, of course, after you tell your testimony, that's so churchy, right? But after you begin to explain what happened to you, what occurred to you, what really happened, or you begin to emphasize your reality, hopefully people that love you will be able to empathize and not blame you, right? So trauma is not just PTSD. Trauma is not just for people who were in the military. Trauma can come from neglect just as easily as it comes from physical or sexual abuse. And what I am discovering as not just a life coach, but also as a person that is active in ministry, a person that actively intercedes on people's behalf, is when a person doesn't identify something as traumatic, it's because objectively they have eliminated the thought that what happened to them was not okay. So let me rephrase that. Oftentimes when someone writes me or in church, they pull me to the side, or at this point, I don't have to be in church. People just pull me aside in Target. People pull me aside in TJ Maxx. I don't know who they are, but they've heard of the podcast, and I'm talking about here where I live and other places. And they go, hey, I need you to pray for me. I'm really having a difficult time. And they'll describe the situation. And the whole time they're talking, the Lord may speak to me. I may see something. And 1 out of 5, I can connect it back immediately to something that they've experienced in their childhood. And if I'm able to work with them for long periods of time, I'll begin to ask them, tell me how your childhood was. Well, I grew up in a good home. At 2-parent home, we had, money. I went to a private school. Everything's fine there. Nothing's that, that's not the issue. And it's amazing to me how people think that just because you grew up in a 2-parent home, that you graduated high school, that you have all these degrees, that your parents got all their teeth, they show up to every soccer game, their Parent of the Year award in the community, that immunizes them from being a part or actively a part of a traumatic experience. Being raised in a 2-parent home can be just as traumatic as being raised in a single-parent home on welfare. And one of the major excuses I hear oftentimes is, I was raised by a single mom, but I knew I was loved. And that may be true. But as it relates to your healing, you don't need to defend other people to accept your reality. And I found that talking to women of color, we are so protective over our parents, over our sister, over our brother, over our cousins, because we were taught to protect. We were taught that's all we have. And while that is nothing, demonic, it's not wrong, but in the process of protecting, it went from protecting to covering up. And that covering up has led to you not being able to express the trauma that you had to endure, all in the name of we're family. And many of you have endured some traumatic experiences as children, and you're trying to make sense of your life, trying to make sense of why you and your husband are just not getting along in some areas, why you're such a frequent spender, why you're always getting in arguments with people about how you look, or why you're so hypercritical, or even why you're not in a relationship, why it seems like every relationship ends the same way. And you going to therapy is so great. I applaud you. But I also think that that's a way that your adult brain is trying to make sense of something that your child brain couldn't process. Your kid brain didn't have the ability to make sense of how having a parent that screamed at you would make you feel 15 years later. Your kid brain didn't have the ability to process what it was like being related to people who stole, who used harsh language, who was manipulative. You didn't know how that would affect you 15 to 20 years later. And to your kid brain, you didn't know that was traumatic. So maybe when you were a kid, you grew up in a toxic environment. Maybe your whole entire family is toxic. And maybe when you shared your feelings like, Mom, Auntie called me fat and it hurt my feelings. And maybe because your mom is used to your aunt calling everybody fat because your aunt called your mom fat, she just goes, oh, get over it. She's weird. And in the moment, you didn't feel acknowledged. In that moment, you realized, wow, I thought that you were going to say something to my aunt. I thought that you were going to help me. And maybe in that moment, you subconsciously decided to be extremely vigilant about your weight to the point it's led to some mental illness concerning it. For many of you that struggle with anorexia, bulimia, sometimes it can be traced back to trauma. And again, your kid brain couldn't make sense of what was happening and what you experienced, but your adult brain is struggling to process it all. And as a millennial woman, can I just free you for a second? Some of you need to really share your feelings about your life, about how you grew up, about what you didn't like. I know some of you grew up on survival mode. I get it. A lot of us did. And you ain't got to be broke to grow up on survival mode. But now that you're grown, we in inflation, baby. We have survived COVID. Let's start telling the truth. Now that you are grown, you need to be more in tune with what happened to you, how it happened to you, and realize that, wow, you know what? Some stuff I didn't say because I was afraid that it would upset someone. You know, one of the hardest things that I had to come to grips with, I stayed in a place of pain because I didn't want to upset a parent. Isn't that harsh but real? Some of you have been silent about the struggles that you've experienced growing up, whether it be poverty, whether it be sexual abuse, whether it be mental abuse from a parent, from an auntie, from a cousin. And you had to be silent because you were afraid that your speech would disrupt the routine. And you loved your family so much. Remember, your kid brain can't process. You thought that you speaking up would somehow tear the family apart or not make people love you. Listen, some of you are still operating in that same mindset when it relates to fawn. Now, everyone has a fight, flight, freeze response. It's hardwired into our brains, and it doesn't even have to be about trauma. It gets triggered by anything that feels like a threat or a conflict. The issue is how much you get triggered and then for how long. And that's where trauma plays a role. So now that we're adulting, and again, like I said, we're in inflation. Things are going on. Like my whole body is changing. Like I'm like, look, I could drink a smoothie and lose 10 pounds. And now I can drink a smoothie and I feel like I gained 10. What is going on? Now that we are in our adult life, in our adult body, in our adult mind, you may realize you've overreacted to some things. Like, ooh, why did I respond like that? Like, why am I so triggered by my coworker? And you wonder, why did I go numb when that person said that? Or, wow, when I talked to my cousins about what happened in 1996, I can't even remember. Now, most of these things can be attributed to something deeper, like you having a trauma response to something that you felt threatened by. In any moment, you perceive something as an attack, which could be simply your boss giving you feedback. Or when you perceive something as abandonment, which could simply be your partner running late for a dinner date that you set up. You think to yourself, well, if they loved me, they wouldn't be late all the time. You have a trigger. That's your fight, flight, freeze response. And you can't take it off, even if the threat that you perceived is over. And that's basically because your sympathetic nervous system gets triggered by something that shouldn't trigger it. And you can't get back to a relaxed state, which is also called the parasympathetic nervous system. So let me give you another example. So let's say hey, we just got through with Thanksgiving. Let's say you were around the table at Thanksgiving. Your grandma asked you, why you not married yet? And unbeknownst to you, your internal conscious dialogue says all kinds of things that are triggered from your childhood. My grandma thinks I'm a loser. My biological clock is ticking. I can never live up to my parents' expectations. I can't stand this family. I can't deal. I'll never be as perfect as my sister. This signals to your amygdala to sound the alert that the flight or the fight or the freeze response that we've been discussing for the past few minutes. So in response, you might fight. That means you might go off on grandma. Oh, Lord, her wig is going to be turning around. Number 2, you might flee. And you're like, you know what? I hear the microwave going off in the kitchen. Let me go check on that. Right? That's avoidance. And you may freeze, meaning you say nothing. And, maybe you listen to my other podcast episodes on how to have boundaries. So you're just trying to practice not cussing grandma out. You just want to sit there and look at her because you're gathering a strategy, right? Or you may operate in fawn. And fawn looks like when you try to please grandma and tell grandma all these wonderful things that you're doing at work and all these guys that you're dating, and you lie. Oh, but grandma, I have so many great prospects and this is going on. And then you take grandma's advice about getting you a man and then you start dating some crazy guy that isn't good for you, but because you want to live up to this expectation, you just don't want to be lonely and alone and old with eggs that are scrambled because you're trying to people please. Now, the term fawning, people pleasing is dangerous because when you set your life goals up or when the Lord tells you your purpose for your life, it does not include the opinion of other people. And for some reason, I'm surrounded by people pleasers. And let me tell you something. I loathe it. I don't like it because the way that I'm wired as a person, my office in church, my leadership capabilities. I don't know if you ever take the DISC assessment. I'm definitely a D all day long. Okay. I don't understand it because I don't mind going against the grain. My response to trauma is fight and freeze. Not no fawn, because I could care less what you feel about me. But that's just how I am wired. But even for people who are type D like me, if you're surrounded by people pleasers long enough, you'll begin to think something's wrong with you. And then you'll start responding to trauma or misunderstandings or miscommunications through fawn because you just want to fit in to be normal. Because when you fight or you freeze, society or your community of people tell you that you're wrong. So in order to not be wrong, you people please. So now you're operating outside of yourself because it's not natural for you to people please. So then you're mad that you're people pleasing, and the people that you're trying to please are still not satisfied because it never works like that. It's just a cycle of you not being your true self. And I want to free you today. I want to free you from people pleasing, but I know simply listening to this podcast is not going to do it. But fawning, there's a book by Pete Walker. It says fawn types seek safety by merging with the wishes, needs, and demands of others. They act as if they unconsciously believe that the price of admission to any relationship is the forfeiture of all their needs, all of their rights, all of their preferences, and all of their boundaries. What I attempt to instill, to teach, to pour into any woman that is connected to me in business or ministry is this right here. You do not have to forfeit your needs, your rights, your preferences, or your boundaries for anyone. Of course, you can learn to coexist with a person who has different needs and rights and preferences and boundaries. That's a friendship. That's a relationship. But to forfeit all of who you are for approval is nonsense. That has to be painful. And look, we're having a mini conversation here. This is a coaching session. Let me just invite you in, right? Some of you are miserable. because you know I'm talking about you. You know that you are extremely unsatisfied with your life, with your friends, with who you are, because you've given up all of your true self, the true nature of yourself, to please people, and you are still not satisfied and they are not satisfied. That's because God created you to be you, not a version of yourself that fits another person's perspective of who you should be. Fawning is codependency on cocaine. It's when you're focused on getting the approval of other people. So then you end up twisting yourself into whatever it is they're looking for, so you can feel safe in your relationships, so you can feel safe in your friendships, because it's a trauma response to the child you that was not safe in a relationship, that was not safe in a friendship, that was not safe in your family life. Maybe you feel like no one ever gets you. Maybe you feel like no one understands you because you've got so much going on, or all the baggage assigned to your family. Maybe you have body dysmorphia. Maybe you have a mental illness that you struggle with. Maybe you have a disease or an infirmity that's visible that you struggle with, and it's isolating. So in order to fit in, you feel like you have to be less than yourself. And I am telling you today, that is a lie. When you operate in this fawn response to everything in your life, your boundaries end up being non-existent. You end up saying yes to whatever is asked of you, even if it's to your own detriment. Y'all, fawn/people pleasing does not lead to healthy friendships or relationships. In fact, if you are a people pleaser, you have probably ruined the majority of your friendships and relationships without knowing it. Let's just have some real talk here. Because you never showed up as your true self. What happens with people pleasers is that they never choose a side. And trust me, there will come a day in every friendship, in every marriage, in every dating situation, on your job, at your church, within yourself, that you have to pick a side. Either it's yes or no. It can't always be and no. It has to be or. It has to be yes or no. Okay? White or black. Life is not all made up of gray areas. When you operate out of fawn in every facet of your life, you will be tormented because you are so afraid of someone not liking you, without realizing that you don't even love yourself enough to be your true self. You don't get your own work in on time because you're busy helping a coworker. You don't get to enjoy your life because you're busy paying other people's bills. You don't get to enjoy the free time that you do have because you're doing 59 things for your family. You overcommit and you don't want to say no, even with things that you're uncomfortable with, because you are still trying to get the approval of people who could care less. When you are operating in fawn in every facet of your life, even one or two facets of your life, you feel responsible for everybody's feelings. Oh, your boyfriend's upset? Oh my God, let me absorb it. Oh, my boss is upset. Oh my God, let me absorb it. It's my discernment. Let me go into a place of intercession. No. You feel guilty and upset for things that don't belong to you because you don't have boundaries. I see this a lot with millennial women that have mommy issues. or their mom has issues with them, however you want to look at that. Like, you feel guilty or upset because your mom is sad, or because your mom feels lonely, or because your mom's going through a different season in her life. And if you are a good daughter, you find a way to make her happy. See, this is all things that you're intrinsically going through in your mind. So it's different than if your mom says to you, if you were a good daughter, you would do everything you could to make me happy. That's manipulation, if that comes out of her mouth or anyone else's mouth concerning your situation. But when this is something that's intrinsic within you, this is your thought process, that is definitely you operating in fawn. If you have to be less than who you are to seek approval from anybody, let me tell you something, that person don't love you. That person's using you. Real love says, I don't care what you've done. I don't care how long you did it. I don't care who you've evolved into. I care for you beyond your mistakes. There is no security in a love that's earned. And if you have to earn love from somebody, let me tell you something. That ain't real love at all. Turn on Mary J. Blige, because, baby, you still searching for a real love, okay? If you are desperately trying to read other people's minds and anticipate their needs of what would make them happy, and you feel responsible, first of all, you're tired. But secondly, you need to lay down all of these ideals. You need to lay down everything that doesn't belong to you and realize that you are triggered. Life is triggering you. And before I move into that, I've seen people that are people pleasers avoid social situations and feel overwhelmed, which is called being numb or disassociating. And it is robbing them of their life. It's robbing them of their ability to enjoy life to the fullest, because they claim that, oh, I'm such a discerner, I can't be around everyone. No, you're triggered. And it's okay to not go around Bobby and Sue because you know they're going to trigger you. But at some point, Bobby and Sue should not be able to keep you from living your best life. Okay? And while we're on this vein here, I don't know if you ever heard the term emotional chameleons. That's what people who operate in fawn or people pleasers. So they become other people to feel safe. People who have this stress response aren't trying to manipulate, but they do manipulate. And again, this is why I really don't do well with people pleasers, because I pick up on manipulation so quickly. Especially now, because I've been in a situation to where I was manipulated and controlled for a very long time. And I was told I was the crazy one until through therapy, I realized I was the one that had the most sense. So now I can spot, I can smell with all of my senses when some manipulation is taking place, whether it's intentional or non-intentional. But individuals who are emotional chameleons, who walk in people pleasing, they definitely lie to blend in. And if you're friends with a people pleaser, you're not immune. I don't care how long y'all been friends. If they are a people pleaser, something is going to happen in your friendship or in your marriage to where if they are pushed in a corner by other people to make a choice concerning you, they will probably choose to not choose you. They will probably choose to be neutral, because that's a response to stress. It's unconsciously motivated, but they would rather be liked than take the risk and have other people dislike them because of this response to trauma. I know that sounds crazy. Now, emotional chameleons and narcissists are a bit different. So narcissists have a hidden agenda, and they're trying to direct a person to it. Emotional chameleons, those people pleasers, it's all about their primal fear of not wanting to be abandoned, or not wanting to be rejected, or not wanting to be left alone. So people who are emotional chameleons or people who fawn don't feel powerful. Instead, they give up all of their personal agency to other people because they desperately want to belong. Mr. Walker says, if you're a fawn type, you think it's safer to listen than to talk. You think it's easier or safer to agree than to dissent. You think it's safer to offer care than to ask for help. You think it's safer to elicit the other rather than express yourself. And you think it's safer to leave choices rather than express preferences. And when your fawning characteristics are at their worst, you can be a doormat. You can lose yourself. You can get lost in serving others. You can become how do you say that word? Perfectionist. Sorry about that. And the feelings that can be associated with that are guilt, shame, resentment, loneliness, disconnection, disassociation, and numbness. And so if any of this struck a chord within you, let me just say this. It's okay to have a healthy mix of all 4 F's. The fight, the flight, the freeze, and the fawn. If you're a fighter, keep healthy boundaries. Be assertive. Ask for what you need. For the flight, learn to disengage. Learn when to have a healthy retreat. And know when pushing forward will exacerbate a situation. Freeze. There's nothing wrong with freezing. I teach that. Take about 20, 30 seconds and say absolutely nothing. There's nothing wrong with having awareness and being in the moment. I love how Mr. Walker, he describes it as a poised readiness. Oh, I'm stealing that phrase. I love it. To have a poised readiness about yourself. And then fawn. Fawn means you're able to listen. You're able to help problem solve. A response to trauma, a proper response to trauma can be all of these. You can problem solve. You can lean into love and service without self-detriment. You're fair and can express your own point of view and needs. There's nothing wrong with being in the process of healing from trauma. As soon as you get over trauma, something else traumatic is going to happen that you have to get over. I'm realizing that. People pleasing is an unnecessary torment that is plaguing so many women, and it's affecting their ability to be their best self. And here's what I want to encourage you to do. If you know this has struck a chord within you and you know you've not been as present in relationships, or that your response to trauma has created a rift with your spouse or with your friends, open up to them. Don't try to make excuses. Don't try to be liked when you say it. Just be straight up. You need to have community to where you can say, look, I got some stuff going on and I want to apologize. And hopefully when you're apologizing, you really mean it. And hopefully you can commit to working on that part of yourself, not just so you can people please your friends, but because you realize that you're not able to be your best self in this tormented state of responding to trauma. I do want to thank you for listening, and I want to invite you to join me at www.thedevens.com. There's a whole community there. I have so many blogs that have turned into these prophetic mantles or prophetic writings. And literally this year, I literally have more than 500, 600, 700 people read an article within the first week that I posted. And I want to thank y'all for that. I want to thank you for being a part of community. I want to thank you for giving me a space to express my thoughts. And these are pretty much coaching sessions to where I just talk. But thank you for reaching out to me and being honest and expressing yourself and getting it out. That's what this is about. This is the Hey Sis community. And I want to thank you for that. I want to invite you to be a part of what I'm building even the more. And lastly, my prayer is that we all respond to trauma in a healthy way, not just in the spirit, because I can speak in tongues as soon as I'm faced with something that's traumatic. But after I come out of the spirit, I want to make sure I'm mature enough to say, look, I didn't like this. Not to people please my way out of it, not to always punch somebody in the face, not to always flee and disassociate, but to be able to respond to trauma in a healthy manner to where it's not making me become another person, and that I'm able, and that you're able to express yourself fully. That's the goal here. I want to thank you for listening again, and have a great rest of your day, y'all.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Hey Sis podcast. Check out www.thedevans.com for more blogs and motivation.